My name is Dorian Kane, and I've always believed that when you love someone, you give without measuring. You show up. You provide. You protect. That was the way I was raised. My father used to say, a man doesn't count his coins when he's feeding his house. And I held on to that, even when I shouldn't have. So there I was, standing under the amber lights of a rooftop bar that probably cost more per square foot than most apartments in the city. String lights hung like fairy dust over the skyline. A live jazz band played in the corner, and servers moved like dancers, carrying silver trays of oysters, imported champagne, truffle canapes. It was a party for Camille's father, Gregory Moreau. His 70th birthday, a celebration of a man I had never liked, but had always respected, at least for the sake of my wife. No one introduced me as her husband that night. Not once. I was just Dorian. Not Mr. Kane, not Camille's partner, not the man who had renovated Gregory's country home and covered the last 5 Christmas vacations. Just Dorian. One waiter even mistook me for part of the staff, handed me an empty tray, and asked if I was covering table 9. I didn't even bother correcting him. I smiled and moved along. Everyone around me wore tailored suits and diamond earrings, their laughter rising above the band like arrogant perfume. I stood near the edge, looking out at the skyline, sipping sparkling water while Camille floated from table to table like a hostess, not a wife. Her dress was gold and backless. Her heels clicked with power. She didn't look at me once, not even when she gave a speech. She raised a glass and toasted her father with a dazzling smile, calling him a legend, a leader, the reason she was who she was. People clapped. Some even stood. Then she looked right at me for the first time that night and walked over. Her face was unreadable, cool, rehearsed. In her hand was a black leather folder. I knew what it was before she said a word. "You got this, right?" she said with a little smirk. I took the folder without hesitation, flipped it open. $12,048.83. Itemized. Every bottle of Dom Perignon, every imported Cuban cigar, every tower of foie gras. I could almost hear Gregory's laugh in the background, already moving on to the next toast. "Of course," I said calmly. And I meant it. I wasn't going to make a scene. That's not how I was built. I pulled out my black card and handed it to the waiter. It swiped without issue. Camille didn't even say thank you. She was already turning away before the receipt printed. I stood there, holding the little white paper in my hand, wondering when I had stopped being her husband and started being just her bank. The night carried on. I returned to my corner. I watched, listened, nodded politely when spoken to. I counted the number of people who knew my name, 0. I counted the number of people who saw me, maybe 2. I remember watching Camille walk over to a man near the bar. He was tall, well-groomed, in a burgundy velvet blazer. She touched his arm like they'd known each other for years. That was the moment that burned itself into my memory. The moment she came back, stood right in front of me, and said it without blinking. "You're boring. I want a divorce." Just like that. I didn't even react at first. I thought maybe it was a joke. The jazz band was still playing. Someone in the back was cheering. But her eyes didn't waver. They were stone cold. And then came the twist of the knife. "My boyfriend is driving me home." I looked past her. The man at the bar raised his glass in my direction, like we were old friends and on the same joke. My jaw clenched, but my voice never rose. I didn't ask why. I didn't beg. I didn't even flinch. Then Gregory walked over, champagne in hand, red in the face from laughter or liquor or both, and leaned in close. The music muffled behind him. His breath reeked of cigars and entitlement. "You were just a sponsor, son. Always have been," he said with a sneer, then patted me on the chest like I was some retired servant they were finally letting go. I nodded once, tucked the receipt into my jacket, and walked out. No drama, no outburst, just the sound of my shoes on marble and the cold lift doors closing behind me. But the silence inside me? That wasn't peace. That was the silence of something ancient and dangerous being buried for too long, finally waking up. I walked down the street as the night wind cut through my coat, and I kept thinking to myself, so this is how it ends. Not with a fight, not with a scream, with a bill and a laugh. I got into my car, adjusted the rearview mirror, and looked at myself. For a second, I almost didn't recognize the man staring back. I didn't look broken. I looked calm. Too calm. Exactly 1 hour later, my phone rang. I was back in my apartment, shoes off, coat folded neatly on the chair. The first ring, I ignored. I knew it was her. I could feel it. The second ring came faster. The third even faster than that. On the fourth, I answered. Camille's voice was shaky, urgent. Dorian. They froze the account. The payment didn't go through. The restaurant's calling it fraud. The police are here. They're asking questions. I didn't say a word. Just listened. They're threatening to press charges. My dad's losing it. The restaurant manager says the name on the bill doesn't match the account. What's going on? Dorian? Dorian. I finally spoke. Calm. Measured. You made your choice. And I ended the call. That was the moment it all turned. Not because I yelled. Not because I fought. But because for the first time in years, I didn't say yes. I didn't show up to save them. And that's when the panic began. When I first met Camille, I didn't see the trap. That's the honest truth. All I saw was a woman who carried herself like she had been born into a world I didn't belong in, but somehow still reached for me. I was at a tech conference when she walked into my life. She wasn't there for business. She was a guest of a friend, killing time before dinner. She had this effortless charm, designer heels, glossy lipstick, but her voice was warm, curious. We struck up a conversation over hors d'oeuvres and wine, and by the end of the evening, she was asking about my work like she was genuinely impressed. I like men who build things, she said, fingers brushing my wrist. Especially when they don't brag about it. I should have paused right there. But I didn't. Back then, I had just expanded my smart security firm into its second office. It was small but solid. My team respected me. Clients trusted me. I wasn't flashy, but I was comfortable, and most importantly, I was proud of what I was building. Camille told me she admired that. She said she was tired of trust fund guys who didn't know what real work felt like. That she wanted someone real. I thought I was lucky. Turns out I was being recruited. The first sign came during our third date. She took me to a private gallery showing, something I'd never have had access to on my own. I felt out of place in my off-the-rack blazer while everyone else floated around in silk and linen, sipping wine older than my company. But Camille stayed close. Introduced me as an entrepreneur with pride in her voice. It felt good. Like maybe I was finally being welcomed into a world that had always been locked from the inside. Looking back now, I realize what that night really was, an audition. The night we got engaged, her parents invited us to dinner. A private table at an exclusive restaurant, valet parking, wine I couldn't pronounce. Gregory, her father, barely acknowledged me beyond a handshake. Her mother, Lorraine, asked what my parents did for a living before complimenting Camille's ring like she'd bought it herself. But when the bill came, Gregory looked right at me and said, "You got this, right, Dorian? Show the family what kind of provider you are." I laughed. I thought it was a joke. But Camille squeezed my hand under the table and whispered, "Go on, baby. They just want to see that you're serious." So I paid. The engagement party came next. Camille wanted it big, not tacky big, she said, elegant big. I offered to split the cost with her parents, but Gregory said, "If you're going to be the man of the house, then own it." And so, I did. $18,000 later, their backyard looked like a wedding magazine cover. Camille glowed in every photo. I smiled in most of them. Her parents laughed the loudest. No one asked how much it cost me. The wedding was more the same. Camille didn't want to use her savings. She said, "Let's keep that for emergencies. You're doing well anyway." I agreed. I kept telling myself love isn't about keeping score. After the honeymoon, Camille told me she wanted to take time off work. "I need to figure out what really fulfills me," she said, lying across a couch she picked out from an overpriced showroom. My soul was tired. So she stopped working. Just like that. I told myself it was temporary, that she would find her footing. But instead of job hunting, she spent her days at yoga retreats, luxury salons, and charity luncheons. When I brought it up, she kissed me on the cheek and said, "You're doing so well, babe. I'm so proud of you. Let me just enjoy this phase, okay?" That's when Gregory started calling me a real man. "Providing for your wife so she can rest and discover herself? That's noble," he said, handing me a glass of scotch during one of his dinner parties. Most of these new age boys can't even pay their own bills. I swallowed the drink and the compliment, not realizing both were laced. I remember renovating their beach house, the one in Cape Cod. Gregory mentioned it casually over lunch, saying it had potential but needed modern security and a full upgrade. I offered to help, thinking it was just advice or a favor. Next thing I knew, Camille had scheduled a full walkthrough with my team. No contracts. No payments. Just an unspoken assumption that Dorian would take care of it. And I did. Tens of thousands of dollars in labor and materials, all paid from my pocket. When I asked Camille about it later, she said, "It's for family, babe. Don't be weird." Family. That word. It was thrown around like confetti, but never once stuck to me. I was always just outside the circle, close enough to fund the party, but not enough to belong in the photos. Gregory would toast to his legacy, Lorraine would gush about Camille's taste, and I'd be the one driving home alone because Camille wanted to stay the night and catch up with her cousins. And still, I stayed. I stayed because I believed marriage was supposed to be selfless. I stayed because I thought Camille was just lost, or growing, or overwhelmed by expectation. I told myself we'd get through it, that all couples go through phases. But the truth is, I didn't want to admit I had been played, because that's what it was. A slow, calculated setup. Camille had charm, yes. But more than that, she had vision. A cold, cunning vision. She saw my ambition, my integrity, my drive, and knew exactly how to turn them into an ATM. Her parents? They applauded every transaction. And I kept showing up with my card in hand, thinking love meant not saying no. But it wasn't love. It was a business arrangement I never signed up for. And the worst part? I didn't even realize I'd been drafted into their game until it was too late. The night before Gregory's birthday bash, Camille told me, "Let's make it perfect, okay? My dad deserves the best." I nodded, because I still believed that if I gave just a little more, maybe they'd see me. Really see me. They did see me. As the sponsor. Nothing more. And on that rooftop, when she handed me that bill, and her father called me just a sponsor, I realized something I should have known a long time ago. I was never part of the family. I was just the wallet that bought them their lifestyle. But what they didn't know, what none of them ever bothered to ask, was that I had been planning for a very different ending. And it was already underway. After the wedding glow faded and the photos were framed, life with Camille began to feel less like a partnership and more like a performance. And I wasn't the lead actor. I was the sponsor, the financier, the backstage crew tasked with keeping the lights on while she stood center stage. At first, I told myself it was just adjustment. Every marriage has a curve, right? But things changed fast. So fast, in fact, that by the third month, I realized Camille wasn't pretending anymore. She was revealing. Unfiltered, uninterrupted, and unapologetic. Mornings used to be soft. She'd curl into me, mumble something about dreams or breakfast, and we'd laugh about needing 5 more minutes in bed. That stopped almost overnight. She began sleeping in silk nightgowns she didn't wear for me. The scent of my cologne on her skin had been replaced by some designer perfume I couldn't pronounce, gifted by a friend from yoga. She took over the guest room under the excuse of needing space to meditate. Meditation quickly turned into locked doors and muffled video calls. I'd knock, and she'd snap, "Privacy, please," as if I were intruding in her hotel suite. Every day felt colder. She no longer asked about my work, didn't care about the new tech prototype I was building or the expansion I was negotiating. When I tried to share, she blinked slowly like she was waiting for me to finish so she could scroll her phone again. Her days were curated like she was running a lifestyle magazine. Pilates at 9, brunch with her girls at 11, browsing boutiques with Lorraine by 2, back home by 5, usually with shopping bags or flowers from a fan, as she jokingly called them. I didn't laugh. Not because I was jealous, because I was starting to see through her. Not a crack, not a flaw, a mirror. And what it reflected was chilling. There were nights I came home late from work to find her sprawled on the velvet couch, legs crossed, glass of wine in hand, laughing into her laptop. The moment she heard the door unlock, the lid would snap shut. Just like that. No explanation. No effort to make me feel like anything other than a ghost haunting his own home. One night I walked in and heard her say, "No, he's harmless. Think of him like a landlord who never checks the building." Then she laughed, one of those cold, airy laughs that used to charm me, but now just made my stomach twist. When I stepped into the room, she went silent, smiled like nothing happened, and asked if I'd picked up milk. That was Camille. Sweetness when she needed it, distance when she didn't. The house, once a place of warmth, became a glass cage. Beautiful, clean, loveless. Even the art on the walls started to mock me. Portraits of abstract faces looking the other way, never meeting my eyes. I had designed the place myself. I remembered how excited she'd been when we picked the marble for the kitchen island. Now she didn't cook. The stove stayed cold, the dining room pristine. We were living in a showroom, not a home. Her mother only made things worse. Lorraine visited every other week, breezing in like royalty. She'd kiss Camille on the cheek, glance at me with polite contempt, then start offering unsolicited suggestions about the energy of the home. "You should turn Dorian's office into a Pilates room," she once said, sipping rose before noon. "He can work from the garage. It's more masculine." Camille laughed and said, "That's not a bad idea." I stared at them both. Not one of them blinked. Another time, Lorraine saw me carrying groceries and remarked, "Well, at least you're useful in some way." No smile, just a nod like she was checking a box. I confronted Camille that night. I stood in the hallway, blocking the door as she tried to breeze past me in another silk robe. "Do you even like me anymore?" I asked. She didn't even flinch, just narrowed her eyes like I had asked her if she'd remembered to pay the gardener. "Relax," she said, tossing her hair. "You're stable. That's what you're here for." I felt the floor shift beneath me, but I stayed calm. That word, stable, like I was a bookshelf or a lamp, useful until upgraded. I wasn't a husband to her. I was a credit card with a pulse, a placeholder, the man who looked good enough on paper but boring enough not to matter. After that conversation, something snapped in me, not loudly, not all at once, quietly, like a wire tightening in the background. I stopped asking questions, stopped trying to touch her, stopped pretending this was a real marriage. She noticed, briefly. "You've been quiet lately," she said one morning while scrolling through her phone. "Is work stressful?" "No," I replied. "Everything's crystal clear." She smirked, satisfied. She thought I meant I had made peace with this life. She had no idea I was already planning my exit. You see, the thing about being used for your stability is that people assume you're harmless, that you'll just keep paying, keep nodding, keep showing up with your wallet open. But the truth is, the quiet ones are always underestimated, until they aren't. In the weeks that followed, I began keeping notes. Little things, patterns, calls she made, receipts she forgot to hide, passwords she left visible when she got too comfortable. I wasn't trying to catch her cheating. I already knew something was wrong. What I was doing was mapping a pattern, building the blueprint of a life I would one day burn down carefully, legally, without ever lifting my voice. The thing about being in a glass cage is this: you can see everything. And once you stop pretending you're part of the decor, you start noticing every flaw in the structure. The cracks were already forming, and I wasn't planning to fix them anymore. There's a moment, one moment, when everything clicks. Not in an explosive, screaming kind of way. Not in a way that makes the room spin or sends you running. No, it's worse than that. It's cold. Still. Like standing in a silent room after someone's just pulled the pin on a grenade. You don't hear the blast right away. You just know it's coming. And for me, that moment came on the night of Gregory Morrow's birthday. Camille had been planning it for weeks, maybe months. Every evening, she was on the phone with event planners, caterers, florists, and venues. She coordinated down to the color of the toothpicks. Literally. She even brought home samples, holding them next to the tablecloth like the fate of the party depended on hue and shine. She never asked for my opinion. Not once. And I didn't offer. I learned my place. "It's my dad, not a garage party," she said with a roll of her eyes when I asked if we could do something simpler. "Luxury only." I just nodded. I already knew where this was going. The day arrived, and the rooftop bar they rented was a palace in the clouds. Everything screamed wealth. Fireworks were scheduled for 9 p.m. sharp. A jazz band played softly as guests arrived in black tie attire. The air reeked of perfume that cost more than most people's monthly salary. There were gold-rimmed glasses, custom name cards, lobster towers stacked like sculpture, and servers in white gloves silently gliding through the crowd. Gregory had arrived in a rented vintage Rolls-Royce, stepping out like royalty, grinning ear to ear as people lined up to kiss the ring or his wallet. Or both. I didn't even have a seat at the main table. That stung. I won't lie. My name was scribbled on a card 3 tables back, next to a couple of Gregory's distant cousins who hadn't seen Camille since she was in braces. They greeted me kindly, asked if I was still doing computer work. I smiled. Said yes. No point correcting people anymore. Camille was a vision that night, at least on the surface. Gold dress, flawless makeup, the calculated air of perfection. She And maybe it did. She worked that room like a queen among subjects. Every smile looked rehearsed. Every laugh came out on cue. But when I looked closer, I could see it, the hollowness in her eyes. Like none of it mattered to her either. She just wanted to win. And I was just the man who paid for the trophy. When the main course was served, filet mignon with truffle butter and scalloped potatoes, I barely touched mine. I watched as Camille whispered to a man by the bar. Tall guy. Slick suit. He was out of place, too sharp, too bold in his body language. She touched his arm once. Laughed a little too loudly. I recognized the look. I'd seen it before. She used to give it to me. I didn't make a scene. I just sipped my water and waited. The band dimmed as dessert came. 3-tiered cake flown in from New York, each layer a different flavor, each slice served with gold-plated forks. Gregory stood up, raised a glass, and gave a speech about legacy and what it means to build something that lasts. Everyone clapped. He never mentioned me. Not once. Not as his son-in-law. Not as the man who helped pay for his last 2 property renovations. Not even as Dorian. I didn't exist. Then Camille took the mic. She thanked everyone for coming. She praised her father for his unmatched wisdom and generosity. She made people laugh. She even teared up a little at the end. A perfect performance. Then she walked over to me, slowly, like she was building to something, and placed a black leather folder in my lap. "You know what time it is," she said with a half laugh, her voice low so no one else could hear. "Time to pay, husband." I opened it. $12,000. And change. My name was on the invoice. My company's name, too. She had already added it to the catering records. There was no hesitation in her eyes. This was routine. I slid my card across the table without a word. The waiter returned with the receipt. I signed. She didn't even look at the total. And then, right then, while I was still holding the pin, she leaned in and whispered, "You're boring. I want a divorce." Just like that. I stared at her. I didn't react. Not visibly. But something in me shifted. Something old. Something sharp. She kept going. "You just don't excite me. I've been patient. But I need more." I wanted to laugh. I really did. Because I was the one who had been patient. I was the one who had watched this marriage rot from the inside while holding it up like some crumbling pillar, praying no one else noticed. But she said it like she was doing me a favor. I stayed quiet. Let her finish. Then she dropped the knife. "My boyfriend is driving me home." She said it so casually. Like she was letting me off the hook for an errand. She gestured toward the man at the bar, the same one she'd been giggling with earlier. He raised his glass, nodded at me. Mocking. Proud. I imagined the two of them laughing about it in the car ride over. Planning how she'd say it. What her facial expression would be. Whether I'd cry. And just when I thought the night couldn't get more surreal, Gregory walked over, clapped me on the shoulder, and leaned in. "You were just the sponsor, son," he said. "Always have been." There it was. The truth. He smiled and turned away before I could respond. But I didn't need to. Because in that moment, surrounded by fireworks, flutes of champagne, and applause, I found the quietest, coldest part of myself. And it wasn't broken. It was ready. I stood up, buttoned my jacket, and walked toward the elevator. No one followed. No one stopped me. I didn't say goodbye. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't even look back. But inside, I made a promise. They thought I was boring. Predictable. Safe. They were about to find out what happens when the man you underestimate the most finally stops playing along. And when I walked into that elevator and the doors closed behind me, I didn't feel like the loser of a scene. I felt like the beginning of a storm. They had no idea. But they would. Exactly 1 hour later. Exactly 1 hour. That's how long it took for the weight of their arrogance to catch up with them. I was back in my apartment by then, quiet space, dim lights, jazz humming from my speakers. I had poured myself a glass of bourbon, not out of celebration or anger, just routine. There was something calming about the stillness after chaos. The eye of the storm, maybe. My suit jacket hung over the arm of the chair. My shoes were lined by the door. I was sitting on the couch with the receipt still in my pocket, untouched. I hadn't even taken off my watch. I just sat there, not thinking, not planning. Just existing. Letting the silence settle around me like fresh snow. Then my phone rang. I didn't move. Just glanced at the screen. Camille. Ignored it. Rang again. Still her. Decline. Third call came not 10 seconds later. I almost laughed at the speed of it. For someone who had just declared she wanted a divorce and left with another man, she was calling like she'd forgotten her keys. The fourth time, I answered. Her voice was different. Gone was the cool, mocking tone from the rooftop. Now it was tight. Breathless. I could hear the panic riding on each syllable. Dorian, she said, like my name was suddenly urgent. You need to fix this. The restaurant, they froze the account. I leaned back against the cushion, letting her speak. I didn't say a word. They said the payment bounced. Something about fraud alerts. The staff locked the doors. They won't let anyone leave. They think we tried to run out on the bill. I stayed quiet. The manager is saying they're calling the police. Dad's screaming. He's threatening to sue the venue. And they're saying your name's on the contract, but the card that paid doesn't match the records. What the hell is happening? Her voice cracked on that last sentence. It was satisfying. I won't lie. I finally spoke. Just one line. You made your choice. Then I hung up. She called back immediately, straight to voicemail. Then Gregory called. I let that one ring until it stopped. Then the boyfriend. His number wasn't saved, but I knew it was him. The message read, "Fix this, or I'll make sure everyone hears about what kind of coward you really are." That was the message that made me smile. They thought they were the puppeteers, pulling strings. What they didn't know, what they never once considered, was that the strings had been in my hands the entire time. See, what Camille didn't understand was that I had stopped being her stable man a long time ago. The moment I saw the shift, when her touch turned cold, her laughter came too easily with others, and her eyes always darted to the door, I started preparing. Quietly, carefully. A month before the party, I opened a holding trust in the name of my firm. Not in my name. Not tied to our joint accounts. Every major liquid asset I had, stocks, properties, even my car, was rerouted and retitled. Camille never noticed. She had long stopped looking at spreadsheets, let alone asking where our money came from. Then I rerouted the payment method linked to the credit card she used, the one she thought was our joint spending account. That card was no longer active. The replacement had a transaction limit, a limit that stopped right around $10,000. The party crossed $12,000. And I knew that. I counted on it. It triggered a fraud alert. I had set it that way with the bank. Anytime a large charge came through that wasn't pre-authorized by my private number, it would be flagged, suspended, investigated. Camille, of course, knew none of this. Why would she? I was just the sponsor, the harmless provider, the man in the corner who nodded and paid. The irony was almost poetic. I took another sip of bourbon and sat back. The phone lit up again. This time it was a video call. I let it ring, let it buzz, then finally answered, without saying a word. The camera shook as Camille tried to angle it. She was no longer glowing. Her hair was slightly frizzed, her lipstick smudged. Behind her, Gregory was arguing with a manager in a black suit who looked absolutely done with the night. A uniformed officer stood by the exit, arms folded. "Dorian," she said again, this time more desperate, "please, just call the bank. Tell them it's a mistake. Tell them you authorized it. We're being held here like criminals." I stared at the screen. "You are criminals," I said softly. "Just not in the way you think." Her face twisted. "What the hell does that mean?" "It means," I said, setting my glass down carefully, "this wasn't a mistake. This was the moment you all showed the world exactly who you are. I just let it happen." She blinked, confused, then furious. "You bastard," she spat. "You embarrassed us. You humiliated my father. You." I ended the call. I stood up, walked to the window, and looked out over the city. It was raining now, thin, cold streaks tracing down the glass. Somewhere out there, the rooftop party was crumbling. Their perfect night was collapsing in real time, and I wasn't doing a thing to stop it. That's the part they couldn't understand. They'd never met a man who could walk away without swinging back. They thought revenge was loud, explosive, something out of movies. But real revenge? The kind that cuts deepest? It's quiet. It's clean. It looks like peace. And the best part? It had only just begun. By the time Camille and her entourage were being questioned at that rooftop bar, the truth was already in motion. The headlines hadn't hit yet. The whispers hadn't started. But the real damage? That was already done weeks before the fireworks ever lit the sky. Because while Camille was out shopping and her father was puffing cigars paid for by the sponsor, I was in boardrooms, on calls, signing contracts they never even thought to ask about. Let me take you back to what they missed. About 6 weeks before Gregory's birthday, I finalized a deal that would change everything. My company, which Camille always referred to as that little tech thing, had just entered the big leagues. I'd merged with an international security conglomerate, one that had been quietly courting me for a year. They wanted what I had, Proprietary smart systems I designed from the ground up, software trusted by private banks, embassies, and high-net-worth clients. I didn't flash it around. I never wore my net worth like a trophy. I liked clean suits, modest cars, and silence. And they mistook all of that for weakness. So when Camille rolled her eyes every time I worked late, when she joked with her friends that I was always in the server dungeon, I smiled and let her talk. Because I wasn't just running my company, I was evolving it. And once the ink dried on the merger, I wasn't just a business owner anymore. I was a private tech consultant for governments, hedge funds, and elite networks across 3 continents. I became very, very wealthy. But the smartest move I made wasn't the deal itself. It was how I shielded it. Legally, everything went through a holding trust, K&T Solutions LLC, quietly named after my grandparents. It was listed as the owner of my new shares, my stake in the merger, and the rights to my tech. Camille wasn't part of it. Neither was her family. The prenup she once laughed about, calling it just paperwork, turned out to be more than enforceable. It was airtight, and I had followed it to the letter. I also withdrew from our joint accounts, not all at once, not enough to raise suspicion. Just slow movements. Strategic ones. By the time her father's birthday rolled around, those accounts were barely holding enough to cover the champagne. And that was intentional. I knew they'd hit a wall eventually. Camille, in her usual entitled rhythm, had scheduled automatic withdrawals from our joint card for the party venue, the cake, the catering, and more. I've been getting alerts on my phone for weeks. But I didn't stop her. Not yet. I let it pile up. Because I knew how she'd behave. She couldn't help herself. Her confidence had calcified into arrogance. She believed I'd cover the bill without blinking. She didn't even consider that I might let the train crash just to prove a point. That night on the rooftop, when she handed me that bill, so casually, so smugly, I knew exactly what would happen. I knew the card wouldn't clear. I knew the restaurant would trigger a security response. And I knew their family's name would be associated with an incident they couldn't erase. But the real damage didn't come from the money. It came from the footage. One of the waiters had a grudge. I don't know the full backstory, but apparently, Gregory had berated him in the kitchen before the party, called him useless, slapped a tray out of his hands. Camille, of course, laughed. "Don't take it personal," she said. "He's old school." Well, that waiter took it personal. He recorded the entire scene, Camille shoving the bill in my lap, her boring speech, the declaration about her boyfriend, Gregory's smug insult, and posted it on social media. Just a few seconds of video, but it spread like gasoline. Within a day, it had 2 million views. By the end of the week, local news stations were covering it as a viral meltdown. The sponsor husband, they called me. The man who paid for his own humiliation. I didn't say a word to the press. Didn't comment. Didn't react. I let the video speak. And the world did the rest. Camille's influencer image began to crack. Brands pulled out of her collaborations. Her social media went from glossy selfies to silence. She tried to delete the video. It was too late. The internet doesn't forget. But what really shook her was the financial freeze. The vendors began sending notices. The venue threatened legal action. The florist demanded full payment with interest. All charges were linked to her name because she used my card to book them, thinking it still held weight. It didn't. She sent me a voice message the day after the party. I listened to it once. "You humiliated me," she hissed. "You could have just said no. But you let it happen. You let us all fall." I didn't respond. I archived the message. Because the truth was, I didn't let them fall. They climbed up on a house of cards, and I simply walked away. A few days later, Camille showed up at my office. She wore black sunglasses even though it was cloudy. Her heels clicked across the marble floor like a metronome of fake confidence. My assistant looked at me with concern. I nodded. Let her in. She walked in like she still owned part of me. Like she thought she could smile and talk her way back into whatever piece of the empire she thought she deserved. "We can fix this," she said as soon as the door closed. "We just need to tell people we had a fight. That the video was taken out of context. That we're working through it." I let her speak. "We can say the boyfriend thing was a joke. That I was being dramatic. You know how I get," she added with a soft smile. "Everything's just been so stressful lately." I stood, walked to the cabinet, pulled out a manila folder, and handed it to her. She frowned, opened it. Inside were divorce papers. Itemized. Complete. Served. Uncontested. With an additional sheet, security footage. Her and her boyfriend. My house. While I was at work, she stared at the images. Her face drained of all color. You wouldn't, she whispered. I didn't answer. Just walked back to my desk and sat. You ended this, I said calmly. I'm just finishing it. She tried to compose herself, placing the folder down carefully like she was still pretending this was a misunderstanding. But it wasn't. The woman who had once curated every aspect of her image, her marriage, her circle, now stood completely exposed. And all I had to do was stop protecting her. I didn't ruin her. She did that herself. I just made sure there was no way to edit it. Camille tried to recover. Of course she did. People like her always believe the collapse is temporary, that image can fix anything, that charm can erase consequences. But what she didn't realize was that her fall wasn't a stumble. It was a plummet. And there was no one left to catch her. The day after I handed her the divorce papers, she went quiet. For 2 days, not a single message, no calls, no attempts at damage control. Then, on the 3rd day, she appeared at my office again, this time without makeup, without the designer armor, dressed in soft neutrals like she thought humility could be worn like a sweater. I've been thinking, she said quietly. Maybe I rushed things. Maybe we rushed things. She took a seat across from me without asking and stared down at her hands, as if rehearsing sorrow. I said nothing. Just watched. I was overwhelmed, she continued. The party, my dad, everything, it got to me. I didn't mean any of it. It was the first time she'd ever tried to sound vulnerable. Almost convincing if I hadn't known better. But I knew Camille. I knew her tells. The way her fingers twitched slightly when she lied. The way her eyes flicked sideways to check if her words were landing. This wasn't a woman seeking reconciliation. This was a woman trying to stop the bleeding. I waited. Let the silence press in until she shifted in her chair. I miss us, she added softly. And that's when I reached for the second folder on my desk. Inside were still images, screenshots pulled from my home's internal security system. Footage of her and the boyfriend she had proudly announced at the rooftop party. They weren't just having drinks. They weren't just talking. They were in my bedroom. They were touching things that didn't belong to them. Laughing. Mocking. Taking. I slid the folder across the table. She stared at it. Didn't open it. Go on, I said. Take a look. She hesitated. Then finally flipped it open. The color drained from her face. You installed cameras in the bedroom? She asked, her voice trembling. In every room. Part of my job. Remember? Security systems. You told your friends I was boring. I was just doing what boring men do, protecting what's mine. She looked at the images, then back at me. Her eyes were glassy, her throat tight. You're recording everything? I nodded. Always have. I designed systems for government buildings, Camille. You think I wouldn't safeguard my own home? She sat back, stunned. I could have gone to the police, I continued. Could have filed for criminal trespass, theft, even vandalism. But I didn't. I'm not after revenge. Then what do you want? She asked, barely above a whisper. Nothing, I said. That's the part you never understood. I don't want anything from you. Not your apologies. Not your tears. Not your stories. I just want peace. She looked away, humiliated, and for once, completely exposed. But it didn't stop there. The next week was chaos for her, not me. The video from the rooftop continued to circulate. By now, the public wasn't just laughing, they were dissecting. Memes. Reactions. Think pieces about trophy marriages and financial puppeteering. A panel show even did a segment titled, Are you the sponsor or the spouse? Her name trended online for all the wrong reasons. Her influencer contracts dropped her one by one. A luxury skincare brand quietly removed her photos from their site. A podcast she co-hosted took a sudden creative hiatus. The fashion house that once dressed her sent a legal letter requesting she stop tagging them in posts. Apparently, association with the sponsor scandal wasn't the branding they wanted. But the most brutal hit came from the person she thought would save her, Gregory. He called me furious. You're ruining our family, he snapped. You think this makes you a man? I could hear his breathing through the phone, thick with frustration and scotch. You're just a vendor with a grudge, he conned. I let him finish. Then I reminded him. Do you remember the investment I offered you 2 years ago? I asked calm as ever. The one Camille mocked? The one you said was beneath you? He went quiet. Well, your biggest rival didn't laugh, I said. They signed. And now, they're using my technology to outbid you in 6 regions. By the end of the quarter, your company will be obsolete. Gregory's silence turned to stammering. You gave our competition? No, I interrupted. I gave my clients what they needed. You were never my client. Just another man who mistook silence for submission. Then I hung up. I didn't have to leak anything. But fate did. Within days, an anonymous tip, one I had nothing to do with, was sent to a journalist known for corporate exposés. And that journalist began digging into Gregory's past contracts, his fake charitable donations, some accounting practices that didn't quite line up. The fallout was instant. An audit, a freeze on company assets, a warning issued by the board of directors. Stock prices dipped. Shareholders panicked. Meanwhile, I stayed quiet. Camille tried to save face. She posted a selfie with a long caption about healing, about finding strength in adversity. But the comments weren't kind. People remembered the rooftop video, the tone-deaf laugh, the moment she casually tossed her marriage like a worn purse. Even her boyfriend disappeared. He was never built for fallout. Once the money dried up and the cameras stopped flashing, he ghosted her. She tried messaging me, twice. Once to ask if we could talk. The second time to say she had nowhere to go. I didn't answer either. The last I heard, she moved into a rental outside the city. No help from Gregory, who had his own storm to weather. Lorraine, her mother, had been banned from 3 of her elite social clubs after the rooftop meltdown became public fodder. Apparently, her smugness was easier to swallow when she wasn't being mocked on television. I didn't lift a finger to cause any of this. All I did was walk away. That's the thing people don't realize. Sometimes, silence is the loudest revenge. You take back your power by refusing to give them any more of your peace, your presence, your resources. You take back your dignity by letting the truth be loud without needing to scream it. I didn't have to destroy them. They were always breaking. All I did was step out of the way and watch them fall. Gregory Moreau built his empire on 2 things, intimidation and illusion. The intimidation came easy. He had that old school grit, the kind that filled a room before he even opened his mouth. And the illusion? That was Camille's specialty. Together, they played high society like a game of chess, always moving the right pieces, buying their way out of mistakes, sweeping scandal under imported rugs. But no illusion lasts forever, especially when the man holding the mirror finally stops flinching. It started small. The first real crack in Gregory's fortress came not from me, but from within his own company. An internal memo leaked. An anonymous email sent to a financial oversight committee claimed there were accounting irregularities in several of Moreau Holdings' quarterly reports. Most people thought it was nothing, just a disgruntled employee trying to cause trouble. But I knew better, because I'd sent that email. Technically, I didn't leak the files. I didn't need to. See, years ago, Gregory had tried to recruit me to automate their commercial security branches. He wanted my tech, my data systems, my encryption. Back then, I turned him down. Politely, I said I preferred to stay independent. He laughed in my face and said, "No one stays independent forever. You'll be back." What he didn't know was that during that same pitch meeting, one of his junior analysts, underpaid and underappreciated, slipped and left a flash drive plugged into my laptop. It was filled with raw internal documents, tax reports, shell accounts, quiet transactions. I never used it, not for years, but I archived it. And when the time came, when Camille handed me a divorce with a smirk and Gregory mocked me like I was some fool he regretted letting in, I opened the folder. What I found wasn't criminal in the slam the handcuffs sense, but it was shady, real shady, enough to raise flags with the right people, enough to attract attention. I made a few calls, quiet ones. I didn't go to the press. I went to competitors. One in particular, Harrington and Knox, a long-standing rival of Gregory's firm. I'd consulted with them before, designed a surveillance infrastructure for their overseas factories. They respected me, trusted me, and when I told them I had something that might interest them, they listened. They didn't ask how I got the files. They just asked when they could meet. And when we did, I explained it all. I told them about the shell subsidiaries Gregory funneled contracts through, the ghost employees pulling 6-figure salaries without ever stepping into an office, the off-book incentives paid to international suppliers. In exchange, I asked for 2 things. First, complete anonymity. Second, an exclusive consulting contract for a new product line I was quietly launching. They agreed within the week. What followed was a slow bleed. Harrington and Knox began undercutting Moreau Holdings in every major market. They moved faster, cheaper, and more ethically. When Moreau tried to respond, they were already a step behind. Word on the street started to shift. Clients that had been loyal to Gregory's firm for decades began pulling out. Investors grew wary. Then the IRS knocked. An official audit. Triggered, no doubt, by that same anonymous memo and a well-timed financial tip from a whistleblower who sounded suspiciously like someone with first-hand access to buried reports. Gregory panicked. He called me again, this time not angry, but urgent. "You need to stop this," he growled through clenched teeth. "You don't understand what you've started." I was sitting in my office, sipping tea. Calm. "You remember when you said I was just a sponsor?" I asked. "A nobody with a card and a smile?" He didn't respond. "You should have left me invisible," I said. "That was your mistake. You tried to humiliate the wrong man. You think this makes you powerful?" He snapped. "No," I said. "This makes me clean. You, on the other hand, are about to get very, very public." Click. I ended the call. The news broke a few days later. A financial journal published a deep dive into Morrow Holdings, citing multiple sources and exclusive evidence. The article was brutal. It detailed the alleged money laundering, the misappropriated assets, the falsified invoices. It mentioned unnamed whistleblowers and insider leaks. Social media had a field day. Suddenly, the rooftop scandal wasn't just about Camille and her viral humiliation. It was part of a larger story. A saga about a wealthy family living off lies. The video from the party resurfaced. Again. But this time, it played side by side with Gregory's image and headlines titled, "The Sponsor's Revenge" and "When Silence Strikes Back." And I still hadn't said a single word to the press. Gregory tried to spin it. He scheduled interviews, claimed he was being framed, insisted the audits were routine. But the more he talked, the guiltier he looked. Then came the stock drop. 10% in a day. 20 over a week. By the end of the month, Morrow Holdings lost nearly half its value. A rival firm announced their acquisition of one of his oldest partnerships. Another filed suit, claiming breach of contract based on falsified financial reports. Camille? She went silent again. She'd been trying to stay low, stay clean, but the headlines wouldn't leave her alone. Everyone remembered her from the video. The way she smirked when she handed me the bill. The way she laughed as she announced her boyfriend. That laugh haunted her now. It became the symbol of entitlement. One influencer made a remix of it layered over the sound of a credit card being declined. It went viral on TikTok. Millions of views. Her followers vanished. Sponsorships disappeared. Even her so-called friends began distancing themselves. One by one, their perfect empire crumbled. And I never raised my voice. Never fought back. Never screamed. All I did was prepare. All I did was wait. Because I learned a long time ago, when you know who you are, you don't need revenge. You just need distance. And the patience to let people reveal themselves. Gregory revealed himself. And I made sure the world was watching. They say when a house of cards falls, it collapses all at once. But that's not entirely true. It starts with one edge lifting quietly, slowly, almost invisibly. And by the time the top crumbles, the foundation has already rotted from underneath. That's exactly what happened to the Morrows. One moment they were standing tall on illusion, and the next, there was nothing left to prop them up. Camille tried to hold on longer than the rest. After the video exploded online and her family's name became a punchline on every platform, she did what she always did. She pivoted. Rebranded. New beginnings, she called it. Her captions became full of self-help quotes and soft-lit selfies. She posted about healing and growth and learning to be your own sunshine. But it didn't land. The audience wasn't buying it. Because people hadn't forgotten. They hadn't forgotten how she humiliated her husband in public, how she mocked commitment, how she bragged about her boyfriend at the very party her husband funded. The internet is cruel, but it's also very good at remembering the truth when it's caught on video. She was no longer aspirational. She was viral for the wrong reasons. Meanwhile, the boyfriend, the one she so confidently introduced as her replacement for me, disappeared. Just like that. Ghosted her. He stopped responding to her messages, blocked her on socials, and was spotted 2 weeks later with a new woman, someone younger, someone quieter. Camille's face in the paparazzi photo that surfaced after? Hollow. She looked like a woman who had just realized the man she thought she left me for had only stuck around while the champagne poured and the cameras flashed. Now she was alone, and the invitations stopped coming. The brunches, the designer showrooms, the ladies-only retreats in Santorini, all vanished. Her name wasn't just embarrassing now, it was radioactive. Her mother, Lorraine, tried to rally her old social circle, but even she was quietly phased out after being caught on camera berating a hostess at a private club. A petition had gone viral to have the Moreaus banned from 3 social venues downtown, and it worked. Their family name had become synonymous with arrogance, scandal, and failure. Then came the lawsuits. Vendors from the birthday party started filing civil suits for breach of contract. Apparently, Camille had personally signed off on several orders assuming the funds would come from me. But after the account was frozen, payments bounced. And no one wanted excuses from a woman who claimed to be a victim after publicly shaming the man who paid her bills. She tried to reach out to me, once through email, twice by text, then a letter. The first text was 2 words, "Please talk." I ignored it. The second came a week later. "I messed up. Everything is gone." I didn't respond to that either. Then the letter came. Handwritten. Sloppy script. She hadn't used a pen in years. She'd always typed or dictated her thoughts like a modern queen. The paper smelled faintly of her old perfume. The scent triggered something in me, something long buried. But the words, those erased it. "Dorian, you have every right to hate me. I deserve it. I let my pride destroy something that could have been beautiful." I didn't understand what I had until it slipped away. Not the money. Not the comfort. You. You were the only one who ever stood still while the world spun around me. The only one who gave without asking, who loved without showing off. And I used that. I let my father turn you into a tool. I let my own ego blind me. Please. I'm not asking for another chance at us. Just a chance to say sorry. A real one. Even if it means nothing to you now. Camille. I read it twice. Then folded it neatly and placed it in my drawer. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't bitter. I felt detached. Like someone reading the last chapter of a novel they'd long stopped caring about. But that wasn't the end. The Moreau family home, Camille's childhood mansion, the same one where I was once forbidden to park my car in the main driveway, was listed for sale. Quietly at first. Then publicly when the private buyers backed out. The IRS audit had unearthed enough dirt to freeze several of Gregory's accounts. Without his usual cash flow, he was bleeding fast. Camille, who once mocked me for buying off-the-rack suits, was seen exiting a consignment boutique in sunglasses and a baseball cap. Someone posted a blurry photo online. The sponsor's ex, shopping humble. The comments were brutal. I didn't laugh. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt tired. Because when you see people for who they truly are, watching them pretend again just feels exhausting. She fought the prenup. I knew she would. Claimed emotional duress. Claimed I tricked her. Claimed everything she could think of to argue that she deserved more. But the judge didn't buy it. My lawyers were sharp, my documents tight, and the footage, the one from my home security system of her and her lover, was time-stamped and damning. She left the courtroom with nothing. No alimony. No settlement. Just her name. And even that wasn't worth much anymore. After the divorce finalized, I walked out of the courthouse alone. No reporters. No family. No crowd. Just me, the wind, and a strange sense of stillness in my chest. I didn't feel victorious. I felt free. There's a difference. I bought a new place soon after. Not a mansion. Not some flashy penthouse. Just a quiet home near the water, where the morning light touched the walls like forgiveness. I stopped checking social media. I let the noise die on its own. I focused on rebuilding, not in the dramatic, rise from the ashes kind of way. Just slowly. Calmly. Like breathing again after being underwater too long. One afternoon, while walking by the shore, I saw her, Camille, sitting on a park bench alone, phone in hand, scrolling like her life depended on it. She looked thinner, not physically, spiritually, like someone who had finally seen her reflection without the filters. Our eyes met. She tried to smile, a small, hesitant curve of her lips, the kind of smile that asked for permission to exist. I nodded once, then walked past her. No anger, no confrontation. Just a silent acknowledgement that the past was exactly that, past. Because the truth is, I didn't destroy Camille. She did that all by herself. I just stopped being the floor she walked on. And when she stepped off, the house of cards fell. Victory doesn't always look like confetti falling from the ceiling or loud applause echoing in a crowded room. Sometimes, it looks like a quiet sunrise over a calm ocean. A fresh cup of coffee brewed in your own kitchen. A long walk without needing to explain where you're going or why you're smiling to yourself. That's what victory became for me. Not a loud triumph, but a peaceful return to myself. After the divorce was finalized, I didn't host a party. I didn't update my status. I didn't text friends or post cryptic captions online. I just moved forward. I signed the last of the legal documents, shook my attorney's hand, walked out of the courthouse, and breathed like I hadn't in years. Like my lungs were finally mine again. The new house I bought was nothing like the one Camille and I used to share. It wasn't wrapped in expensive finishes or designed for parties. It was modest, 2 bedrooms, soft gray walls, large windows that welcomed sunlight. The backyard sloped gently into the sound of waves crashing against rocks. It wasn't grand, but it was mine. And more than anything, it was quiet. Each morning, I got up before the world did. I brewed my coffee black, stepped onto the porch, and watched the sky shift from darkness to dawn. There was no chaos. No slammed doors or fake apologies. No walking on eggshells. The silence was no longer hollow. It was healing. I finally had room to think. Room to just exist. The business was thriving, but I didn't throw myself into work as a distraction. I had nothing to prove anymore. After the merger, I kept a consulting role, tight hours, focused work, meaningful partnerships. I took on only what excited me. The rest? I let it go. For the first time in years, I had weekends again. I started sketching again, something I hadn't done since college. I'd forgotten how calming it felt to just sit with a pencil and paper and let your thoughts take shape through lines and shadows. Sometimes, I drive up the coast, park by a cliff, and sketch the waves for hours without checking my phone once. People started to notice the change, not in a dramatic way, but in small moments. My barber said I looked younger. A neighbor I barely knew dropped off banana bread with a note that said, "You look like you found peace." I smiled at that one for days. There were no more fights, no more fake smiles, no more sponsoring someone else's fantasy while losing myself in the process. I wasn't bitter. I didn't hate Camille. I didn't wish her harm. I just didn't carry her weight anymore. She was no longer mine to rescue. Then came the day at the park. It had been months since I'd last seen her, that moment on the bench when I nodded and walked past. But one warm afternoon in early fall, I took a walk by the bay and noticed a familiar figure sitting under a tree, staring out at the water. It was her. Camille looked smaller somehow. Not physically, but in presence. The woman who once owned every room she walked into now sat curled into herself, wrapped in a beige coat. No makeup, hair tied back simply. She looked ordinary. Not in a pitiful way, just real. She saw me. This time, she didn't smile. She just nodded, slowly, humbly, and looked back at the water. I nodded back. No words. No need for them. And then I kept walking. Because closure isn't always a conversation. Sometimes, it's just a moment of mutual understanding that the book has closed, and no one's reaching to open it again. That night, I sat on my porch, sketchbook in hand, the sun setting in front of me. I drew the bay, the curve of the horizon, the way the light touched the water. And as I filled in the last shadow, I realized something. This was the life I had always wanted. Not the chaos, not the performance, just stillness, simplicity, truth. They call me boring. And maybe I was. But boring built peace. Boring paid off debts. Boring walked out of courtrooms with dignity and watched empires collapse from a distance without ever lifting a stone. Camille had her drama. Gregory had his empire. The world they built on my back collapsed, and I never had to scream. All I had to do was stop giving. Stop showing up to be used. Stop handing out stability to people who only valued it when they could spend it. And now? Now I live by the water. I eat when I'm hungry. I laugh when something is truly funny. I don't perform. I don't chase. Sometimes, a quiet life is the loudest victory. One evening, as I was closing up my sketch pad, a kid on a bicycle rode by, saw me, and said, "Cool view you got there." I smiled and replied, "Yeah." Took me a long time to earn it. And that was that. The sun dipped below the edge of the sea, and the world kept turning. But I was finally still. And that was enough.